Вітання з українського.
Good afternoon. We are in the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center and we begin our press conference devoted to the two important bills about decentralization. The first is about the regions of decentralization. The second is about on the capital of Kyiv. And today we have also the support of the USAID of its project, the decentralization, bringing benefits for Ukraine. Those who are watching us on social media may ask your questions in the Q&A section. Also, we have simultaneous translation, and you may use it. We have today Mr. Vyacheslav Negoda, Deputy Minister on the Communities and Territorial Development, and Mr. Vitaliy Bezgin, NMP, and Mr. Popescu, who is from the Directorate-General of the Secretariat-General of the Council of Europe. We have 1 hour at our disposal, and I suggest to start from the bill about the regional state administrations. Although this law obviously is about the governmental bodies, but nevertheless it is considered to be the part of the decentralization reform. Could you please explain this? Thank you. I think that during the latest period of time, we continuously have been discussing this issue, and this is actually the quite common question to this bill. Why you say decentralization reform, and at the same time you have a special draft law on the state administrations in the regions? Actually, this is because we are now transferring the responsibilities from the central level to the local level, and this requires that the local self-governments should have sufficient resources to carry out new functions. At the same time, these new functions and powers of the local authorities should be well balanced with the responsibilities of the central powers. And of course, it's not so easy to transfer responsibilities from the previous administrative districts and communities which went amalgamated some time ago to the upper level, the regions on one hand, and how to balance this with the new role of the governmental authorities in the regions. So we have to review the powers of local state administrations, both at the level of the regions and at the level of the cities and municipalities, and bring them in coherence, in harmony with the new powers of the local self-governments of the same levels. Can we delegate even more power to the local authorities? Yes, this could be discussed, but here we should keep in mind that both sides of this equation should be well balanced. That is, the local self-governments should be well balanced with the representation of the central government. Actually, we are strengthening both roles. Thank you for this explanation. Could you please explain the main provisions of this law, the main aspects of the law? Thank you. I believe that it is very important that we have one more chance to discuss this draft law. The Ministry of Communities and Territories and our parliamentary committee carries out a huge coordinated work, because each amendment, each improvement in the draft law requires a lot of work which brings together different parts of the same law. And we try in this draft law coordinate the new amalgamated territories with the powers of the authorities. So there should be one point of authority at the local level. This is first pillar, the first foundation, and the second, there should be supervision from the center over the regional authorities, and this are two sides of the well-balanced model. On the one hand, we ensured non-interference of the central supervisors into the business of the regional powers, and on the on other side, we thus want to ensure the territorial integrity of the country. And unfortunately, the current effective constitution contains an obsolete provision, but actually the new law is now creating prefectures and these are not the old state administrations, just like it was in Soviet times, which wording is actually reflected in the constitution, and we believe that we will eventually manage to change the attitude towards these borders. Mr. Popescu, what is position of the Council of Europe, which all these years has been a partner to the decentralization reform? So what is the position of the Council of Europe as to this very draft law?
Without entering into any details, I would say that indeed, as Mr. Negoda said, decentralization is about transferring more responsibility to the local level. And currently, in Ukraine, the local state administrations, at the level of Oblasti and Raion, has too many competencies. So one part of this law is to transfer some of these competencies to the local authorities, which are elected by the citizens directly. So this is good for democracy, this is good for decentralization, this is good for responsibility. The other part of the law is about establishing a mechanism of supervision. This is the first time this is done. And this is, of course, an important and sensitive issue. It is important because it exists in all the countries in Europe, simply because citizens may not have, or journalists may not have enough information to be able to make sure that all decisions are in line with the law. And it's also, it's not an obligation under the Charter, mind you. There is no obligation to create something like that, but indeed all countries in Europe have it. On the other hand, it's sensitive because it does create a relation which can potentially be disruptive for local self-government. So it is important that such mechanism of supervision be light, be nimble, be done in a way which is protective of local authorities and protective also of legislation. So this is why there are basically 5 principles under the Charter of what this such mechanism should comply with, should do, to make sure that you preserve local authorities, you preserve local government, you preserve the interests of the citizens, while at the same time you make sure that you have a system where the violation of legislation is identified. I will not go through all these principles. We discussed them. We produced a detailed opinion on the first draft law. I must confess that I was not able to study in any detail the second version. I received it only a couple of days ago. But from what I saw, most of our recommendations were integrated in the text. So the Council of Europe as such, of course, is supportive of decentralization in a country which is still centralized like Ukraine. And of course, it accepts the idea of having a mechanism of supervision of legality by local authorities, but a mechanism which complies with the Charter, with the conditions in the European Charter on Local Self-Government, and which is protective of interests of the citizens.
Пане Попеску, ще одне до вас.
Thank you. And the next question to you. In the last year annual report, I've read that Ukraine was the only country in Europe which did not have such a tool for supervision over local authorities from the central level. The lack of such mechanism, whether it is detrimental for the central power.
I don't think the issue is about the central power. This mechanism is not to protect central power, is not to reinforce central power at all. This mechanism is supposed to protect the citizens, to make sure that the legislation is complied with. Maybe it's an exaggeration that all countries in Europe have it. We have countries which have no local authorities at all in Europe, like Andorra or San Marino, which are countries of 30 to 50, 100,000 inhabitants, so they don't have local authorities and they don't have this mechanism. But indeed, it is common to create a system which is different from the one which is conducted only by the citizens or indeed journalists or organizations. This is a common trend. So as such, I would say it's not about giving more power to the central government. On the contrary, such mechanism should be more or less independent from political influence. It should be relatively autonomous and look only at the law. And in cases where the law has been violated, alert the court. It's not about taking decisions instead of municipalities. It's not about obliging municipalities to do something. It is about sending cases where there is a suspicion of a violation of the law to the court, and the court will decide.
Дякую. Тож давайте тоді розбиратися у деталях механізму цих префектурних повноважень із забезпечення закону.
Okay, let us look closer in more detail to the provisions of the law. What is the mechanism, how this will be done? Thank you. Some time ago, we started our attempts to describe the mechanism as an algorithm. So I would like to explain it step by step. First of all, the local self-government body has the right, not obligation, but the right to hold previous consultations with the local state administration and discuss whether the new decision, new regulation complies with the Constitution. In this case, some time is given to the local state state administration to check the new regulation against compliance to the Constitution, and in case they reveal some non-compliances, they have to draft the opinion and forward this communication to their local self-government. And at this third stage, if the local self-government does not take this opinion, negative opinion, into consideration, that is, if the new regulation breaches Ukrainian constitution, then the head of the local state administration may apply to court, and there might be regulations which may endanger the territorial integrity of Ukraine, and in these cases, the country should be protected. We are in the situation of a war for the eighth year in a row. Yes, I would like to emphasize that that supervision does not mean that we supervise each step of the local self-governments, and we are not actually supervising the steps of the heads of the local self-governments. We are also have no intention to follow very closely each decision. Actually, we mean here the protection of rights of Ukrainian citizens. For example, if you are a mayor in a village, town and city council, and your interests might be violated in any territorial community. That is, all the citizens are interested to be assured that their rights won't be violated. And actually, this is what we want to state in our legislation. And for example, I asked the question, are you interested to breach the law? No, I'm not interested. Then why are you against this new law? So the answer to the opponents is as follows. Today, the Constitution and legislation on local self-governments allows even more freedoms to self-governments and more freedom, more discretion to the state government administrations, while in our new draft law we offer clear rules of the game, in what cases who have to analyze the situation, who has to submit the opinion to court, etc. Actually, we are meaning here the clear procedure which will act exclusively in the regulatory field. So this law about local state administrations is useful to this end. And of course, all the government officials are interested to prevent any chance of criminal responsibility for unlawful actions. And this procedure, which is set by this new draft law, will actually allow to prevent such situations. This also will strengthen the effectiveness of the local authorities at the regional and district levels. Without proper procedures, without proper responsibilities, they cannot function effectively. Now, questions from mass media. Tetiana Logina from Zmyivshchina. I'm very much concerned how what functions will be carried out by the Rayon state administrations. Whether the Rayon state administrations won't get more powers than it is expected, just as it happened with the Rayon self-government councils. First of all, I disagree with the journalist's statement that the Rayon councils have got more powers that people expected. I believe that they would disagree with you. On the other hand, this law will go to the parliamentary scrutiny, and one of my colleagues MPs suggested amendment here. On the other hand, many small councils believe that they are unable to carry out their powers because they have insufficient funding. And they should not be afraid if they have no intention to breach the law. Yuri Lisnichenko, another question. Whether state administrations will get right to manage the financial resources which now belong to the local councils. If yes, how this will be regulated? Perhaps I should answer to this question about the social protection. Quite recently, I was approached by the Special Investigation Task Force working in the parliament about social guarantees, especially to children, etc. My personal position is that all the guarantees, social guarantees provided by the government should be insured up to the lowest level. Otherwise, the state policy should be changed. Not all the local self-governments are ready to take this responsibility of social guarantees upon them. And in this aspect, we should think twice. And today we recommended that the old state administrations should be able to ensure delivery of the social guarantees up to the lowest level. That is what we also recommended in current situation. Also, actually, I should explain that in this very law, we do not take any responsibilities from self-governments. No, we only regulate the responsibilities of the local state administrations at all levels, Rayon, Oblast, etc., keeping in mind that the the role of the districts had changed. So this set of powers was carefully reviewed. As for the resources, zero tax resources, and now the parliament has to vote for the governmental subvention at the level of 180 million hryvnia to finance the local state administrations. And so this should be voted in the parliament, especially in case that the government proves the need for that money. One more question from social media, Poltava region. What will happen to the separate units of the Rayon state administrations? This all will depend on them. The structure, the location of those units depend on the decision of the local state administration. That is, making decisions, you should think twice. And the main objective here is to ensure quality services. In many communities today, we still lack the service delivery centers. And they should exist by the moment when the new structure of cooperation with the local population will be introduced. So those who work in the regions should assist the
Законопроект, я думаю,
So we spent half an hour to speak about this draft law. Now we will speak about Kiev city. While preparing to this event, I entered the site of the Verkhovna Rada, and I have seen that during many years, during many convocations on site, there were many draft laws about the capital of Ukraine. Until now, they were not adopted. Why the way is so long? Why everything is so difficult? Vyacheslav Andronovich, you have the longest institutional memory. That's why the question is to you. I will be brief. We should study the history. We should remember it. I would like to say that those who some time ago prepared this law on the capital, they were really clever people. And in Kiev, there is no executive power in principle. There is a local self-governance that is covered by some hood, by some cap or something else. By the head of the Kiev city administration. This is an interesting model. I cannot find it. Maybe Daniel will tell us about some capital in some big European countries where the mayor have such a cap that he is the head of the executive power and the administration. Speaking simply, local self-governance is under his hat, let's say so. And this was created in such a way, so there is no proper executive power at the level of the capital, whether it is good or bad. Maybe if Kiev joins Kiev Oblast, if it is in the framework of Kiev Oblast, there will be a mayor, there will be a city council, executive committee, everything will be okay. And how do we differ from other communities? We would like to have the same rights as others to form local self-government bodies. About executive power, this is the issue of the system of executive power. That's why I believe at different stages there were different approaches, different wishes to change the law, but each time they made attempts to separate classical self-governance and to separate executive power. But they didn't manage to do this. We won't analyze it now, why it happened so, but I believe that in this situation that we face, we should do everything possible that all parties win in this. And this model, this is a model that we're having. Local self-governance and executive power, now they both lose. Local self-governance, this is not a branch of power actually, but the system of local self-governance and executive power, they in some way in Kiev, it is organized in some weird way. The main that we should do, we should build a classic model that would correspond European principles, European charter. I believe that this should be done, especially we are speaking in the context of the change of the whole system of territorial system of executive power and local self-governance. And if at the level of the regions and communities, we dealt with this issue of local self-governance, especially at the level of communities. The only community in Kiev, it remains in the old model, and it is not grounded properly. That's why this is my opinion on this. We will live and see what happens in the future. Vitaliy, please tell us more about the main provisions of this draft. What is proposed? Thank you. I will have a broader perspective because this is a painful issue concerning this draft law. I believe, and Vyacheslav Andronovich may agree with me, that this draft is really important. And there are many speculations about the draft law on the capital. I would like to answer the first question. The first book about decentralization was written in Ukraine when I was a schoolboy. About administrative procedures, this law, it was adopted after this law and administrative development was approved. And I believe that the next law will be really important concerning key novelties. As a representative of political body, I would like to say that everything that is being discussed concerning this draft law, especially concerning Kiev power, we have power in Kiev, and this is a paradox. They do not have, they don't want to really deal with their responsibilities. So about this draft law, first, it deprives the city head of his powers, and we see now that he is not deprived, in fact, of his responsibility. Also, there is no opinion of international partners. This is the second point. But the Council of Europe provided the first opinion a year ago, and then we understand that we should address our European partners and the Council of Europe. We thank them very much. They prepared their report quickly concerning the analysis of this draft law. Then they say that the Council of Europe criticized this draft, that this doesn't correspond to Charter, but in the report there are some small considerations, but overall this report is positive. Then there is a fourth point in this draft. They say that this is the interregional relations and the power overall in Kiev. The Cabinet of Ministers, it adopts what the power submits, and we look about discussions. So the issue of Kotyubinsky settlement that is near Kiev. So they cannot deal with it properly. The land around Kiev is really costly, and there are many interferences in this process. And some people say that this issue does not correspond to the constitution. So the main thing is the opportunity to create in Kiev an independent executive power and to separate the powers of city council and the city administration. And in the Council of Europe opinion says that this will bring this document in line with the European Charter. So this is about the separation of executive power from the local self-governance issues. And this is about distribution of responsibilities at the level of Kiev, the basic package for the regions, all those things. This is about the restoration of self-governance in Kiev and about the separation of responsibilities, state supervision, and the mayor is elected by Kievans, and he should carry his responsibilities, and he should be provided with proper powers. And if the mayor does not want to take these powers, then maybe he should say that he is sorry and to speak to Kievans about this issue. And also on the 16th, they prepared the opinion concerning this draft concerning what Vitaliy said, whether this opinion was positive on this draft law, and what is the position of the Council of Europe concerning this issue.
Vitaliy said, having a system where the mayor, who is elected directly by you, by citizens, and is accountable in front of the government, is not local democracy. It's not a very democratic system, it's not a very efficient system in terms of governance, and it is not respectful of the provisions of the European Charter of Local Self-Government. I mean, this is undoubtedly something which was to be and is to be commended, and I think we're very happy to see this change, and this change actually after or with or within the constitutional amendments should be also operated at the other levels of local self-government. You should not have a system where people elect a council and then the executive of the council is accountable to the government. This is a complete confusion of the line of responsibility, and it is not an efficient and a democratic system. So to us, this is a good thing. Of course, there are sensitive issues when you separate the two. You install this mechanism of supervision, hopefully of legality, over own competencies. And indeed, we discussed it a bit before on the general law on local state administration. Is there a risk with such mechanism? Yes, there is. And I can tell you that we have seen in the first phase of decentralization such powers of supervision being abused by a number of authorities in a number of countries, including from the European Union and neighbors of yours. So this risk exists. So this law needs to establish a system, a balanced system, where such a supervisory function be exercised properly, professionally, and lightly, with a number of safeguards. This is extremely important. This is why, in our opinion, we said that the provisions which are contained into this special law are not sufficient by themselves to ensure such proper balance and the respect of the European Charter on Local Self-Government. This is a special law which adds and derogates to the general law, which is the law on local state administration. So this is why what we said there is that as long as the general provisions and safeguards which are included or should be included in the general law for all supervision in the country are not enforced, such supervision cannot be organized at the level of the capital because simply it does not have enough safeguards. Once that law is adopted and it establishes such safeguards, such law could be adopted. The second element is the creation of the urban riots. And this is, of course, a very sensitive issue as well. It is a political issue, but it is also an issue of governance. Citizens want administration to be close to them. Citizens want to elect their, district councils probably. And citizens want some form of decentralization of the city. Kiev itself is, I think, 3 million, which is as much as many countries around EU. So of course there are issues of proximity of services and of authorities of democracy here. And here we cannot advise very much because the European Charter does not mention this, and the models in Europe are different. There are capital cities where basically the city is very powerful and the districts, raions, urban districts, urban raions are, very, very weak. There are a municipality where this is the contrary. It is the districts which are very strong and the capital city is very limited in power. Our recommendation is that the city council and the mayor of Kiev should remain powerful, that they should have the main responsibility and the capacity to coordinate urban policies. Because if you split the municipalities into districts which are powerful themselves, you get in the situation where there is no cohesion between the different networks like roads, like infrastructure projects, urban policies in general. You need to have a vision at the level of the municipality. And indeed, then there are a number of issues about the intervention of the cabinet of ministers in the creation and the borders of these urban raions. Indeed, then there was a mention about the subsidiarity principle applied in the relation between the city and these raions. And we think this is probably not the right word, or then it should be defined in a restrictive way, because subsidiarity means normally that you give everything to the lower level unless they cannot execute it, or it can be executed better at central level. And it is very difficult to demonstrate which cannot be executed at the local level. So the city needs to remain powerful, to remain in charge of general urban policies, but to delegate a number of tasks to the raions, rather than, by definition, everything goes to the raion and very little remains to the city level, which would be suboptimal from the point of view of cohesion of the city.
Пане Попеску, не поспішайте. Я все ж таки ще хочу запитати те, про що...
I would like to say about what Vitaliy mentioned, about the members of countries of the Council of Europe where executive power combines with local self-governance in one.
I'm not aware of any right now, to tell you the truth, as this would basically be against the Charter. This was a general system in the 70s in most countries, including France. They have what they called Commissaire de la République, which was a very powerful function. But then in the 80s, there was a big wave of decentralization in the whole of Western Europe, which meant that indeed this function was separated. So basically the government, central government, has its services, which are coordinated by a person, And the city has its own legitimate bodies elected by the population which implement their policies. They are parallel, they have different competencies on different issues, but they are different. And indeed, then there is a mechanism of cooperation which can be based on advice, it was mentioned, or on supervision of legality of their own competencies. Indeed, this is very important to say, the supervisory authority cannot come to the city council and say, no, we don't like how you spend money. No, we don't agree with this project. They can't say that. They can't say that they work in the interest of the population because it's a city council which does that and knows better what the population wants. What the supervisory authorities can do in respect of own competencies of local authorities is to say this decision you took is against the law and send it to court. That's basically the relation. So no, this system of double subordination to citizens and to the government does not exist in Europe if indeed the charter is to be implemented and respected.
Дякую, пане Попеску. У мене запитання до пана
Thank you, Mr. Popescu, about the Council of Europe opinion that this draft should be adopted after the law on mechanisms of supervision. So this is about state administrations and how these drafts will be considered. How do you plan to consider these drafts? We were speaking about it many times. We spoke about it with Daniel, and this is a key story, actually. And the system of governance and common sense speaks about it. So this draft on the capital have direct link to the law on administrations in this case. So this was a compromise between us and the local self-governance. There is draft 4298, and in Kiev, in the spot, the same rules should apply as in any community, and Kiev should not differentiate in this. Another component says that the law on capital, it won't work without adoption of a draft on administration. So first, this should be administration then about the capital. So they will be voted one by one, and the basic law on administrations will be before the law on Kiev, and we share the opinion with the Council of Europe. So this should be done in such an order. So we didn't have questions from Kievans concerning this draft law, but on the internet I saw the comment of the deputy of Kiev City Council, Mr. Bilatsarkovets, and he spoke to the radio host, and he said that in the transitional period that is envisaged by law, that maybe till 2025, the vertical central power will usurp the power in the regions of the city, and the city regional administrations will be until the executive committees and this so there won't be proper vertical of power in the city, he said.
It's worth noting that Metro was the same journalist who mentioned that the Council of Europe criticized very much the draft law, that the draft law did not correspond to the charter in Europe, etc. So I would be very cautious about his statements. But first of all, the draft law provides for the transition period, this is the transition period for half a year, in both for the municipal power and for the district powers. In all the districts, you have those heads of regions who are appointed, and this transition period is needed to allow time for elections, and the districts should get this elected power. then whether there will be interference under the municipal affairs. The Kyiv Municipal Council will be a separate body which will have its own budget, and they will coordinate with the district administrations, and there won't be any state administration interference into them. This will be the resource of the Kievans' taxes paid to the city council, and then they would decide how they would allocate this money to the districts, whether directly or through the Kyiv state administration, Kyiv city state administration. As far as I remember, the previous version of the law, the final version for the second reading, does not provide for the district state administrations. What is provided in the law? The Kyiv City State Administration would have the right to create its local branches in districts, but this won't be the district state administrations. I won't make assumptions how the Kyiv city mayor and the council may act, but I would like to mention that he in half a year he or she may see that we will see more operational and more powerful local self-government, which would function properly at the level of districts. And for some time, this might be in parallel to bodies, is the executive council in the districts, which are now, and the newly elected councils in the districts. And of course, it will be advisable to observe to review the number and the borders of the districts in Kyiv, then to review the powers of the district councils, and this will make the final model of the governance in Kyiv. Actually, this will be similar to the law on the local on the local state administrations, as we discussed in the first half. So when the law will be reviewed, next plenary meeting, we plan to review them. But this will depend on the amendments to the tax code and the budget. And as soon as we review this draft laws in the parliament, we will move to voting on these two laws, which we discussed just now. And but before doing that, as I mentioned, we have to resolve the issues with two previous laws. And one more question about the reform. When amendments to the Constitution of Ukraine will take place, that is when the Dnipropetrovsk and Kirovograd regions will be will change their names. Today, Mr. Daniels met with Stefanchuk, and the next week we expect to publish the new version of the constitutional amendments on the parliamentary website, and upon debate on these amendments in two parliamentary committees which are responsible for them, we will came to an agreement when to vote for them. As for the Kirovograd region and the Dnipropetrovsk region, this is a paradox that people wait for this voting, but I believe that we should discuss the new names for those regions. And eventually, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Popescu. As far as I know, from the very days, from the very beginning of the decentralization reform, and that you contributed very much to the results. And actually, I can say that you inspired a lot of things which were implemented. What are your best recommendations and wishes to Ukraine in this area?
Words, I'm not sure I deserve them, but indeed, I remember we were in a similar format in 2014, and I remember I said that some countries did the centralization very fast, some did it very slow, but for each of them it took about 10 years to complete it, and everybody laughed. People thought I was making a joke, or that indeed I was being too pessimistic, but in fact I was being very optimistic, because none of the countries around which have conducted such reform was in the situation of Ukraine, was the size of Ukraine, and had to accomplish everything that Ukraine had to accomplish, including amalgamation of two different levels of government. So I think as such, this was a very successful reform, because from 2014, first of April 2014, it's been about 7.5 years, and there is hope that within a year, let's say the legislative part and institutional part of the decentralization could indeed be finalized if the constitution can be revised. And this would be very inspiring if within 8 or 8.5 years you can, in a country such as complex and in the situation of Ukraine, accomplish such an ambitious and difficult reform. It is not natural, it doesn't come natural to humans to give up power and resources. This is a reform which is important for the population, as we have seen in our opinion polls, and this is important politically, it's important democratically, it's important economically, it's important from every point of view. So as such, I am confident that this reform can be brought to a fruitful finish very soon. And of course, we in the Council of Europe are here to support, but only upon the request of the legitimate Ukrainian authorities who are responsible in front of the population who elected them.
Дякую. Завершуйте, Вячеславе Андроновичу.
I would like to use this opportunity and to thank you to Mr. Daniel Popescu, who in the most important, crucial moments is ready to arrive to Ukraine and discuss with us the prospective decisions which we are going to make. For us, this is additional source of confidence and we believe that the next steps which we are making in the decentralization reform are a result of consensus. We understand that now the system of the executive authorities should be improved and introduce state-of-the-art approach in management and governance at the local level. Some people believe that decentralization reform is over already, and they do not understand how those two draft laws, which we mentioned and discussed today, are important for the overall progress. I understand that each member of parliament and each political faction in the parliament, they take their own decisions how to vote. But actually voting for these draft laws are not of political nature. Because both these laws are aimed at strengthening the governance in this country. And I believe those members of parliament who think that Ukraine should be strong and should be better, they have to support voting for these draft laws in the parliament. So all the factions who stand at the national positions, they should vote for. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you to the Council of Europe and to Mr. Popescu. And thank you to the Dobra program for its organizational.